Our second bonus episode of the Locked On Bucs podcast this week dropping right now.
You are Locked On Buccaneers, your daily Tampa Bay Buccaneers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Bucs Nation? David Harrison here of the Locked On Bucs podcast, coming to you kind of solo. James Yarko off for this bonus episode. We can find him on Twitter at @JYarko_Bucs. I am at DHarrison82. The show is at Locked On Bucs. If you're watching on YouTube, appreciate it. Welcome in. If you haven't already, please click the subscribe button. It'll help us out. It'll help other Bucs fans just like yourself find the show. And if you're listening to us, as always, we appreciate our audio listeners, our audio audience, the OGs of the Locked On Bucs podcast. And same to you. If you haven't already, please subscribe or follow the podcast. Leave a comment, leave a review. It'll greatly help other Buccaneers fans find us just like you have, and we'll greatly appreciate it. Of course, I'm going to be joined here to do a trimester in review, the first trimester of the 2021 NFL season in the books for your Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And joining me to do that is Scott Smith, the senior writer and editor of Buccaneers.com. Friend of the show, first time on YouTube here with us, Scott. Appreciate you joining us. On Twitter at Scott S. Bucks, senior writer, editor for Buccaneers.com, and one of the hosts of the Salty Dog podcast. If you're not into that, make sure you're catching up on that great interview and episode. My take on fantasy football, Scott, I'm just going to throw it out real quick for you, is this is the same. I've got Darnell Mooney on my roster this weekend, and I've kind of tried to stay the path of I want the real people to win versus the imaginary people. And I know they're real names and all that stuff, but the fantasy football players, right, they don't exist. So I want the real people to win before I care about my fantasy roster players. That's kind of how I stay sane.
Yeah.
It. But
you're saying all that because I bared my soul on Salty Dogs and admitted that I was watching the Dallas.
Yeah.
Who was Dallas playing?
Dallas and Patriots. Yep.
Dallas Patriots game. And by all accounts, I should be rooting for the Patriots. And I was, but I couldn't stop rooting for Dak Prescott and CeeDee Lamb to get me some points.
Yeah.
Fortunately, I don't really get to watch football very often on Sunday, so I don't have that quandary very often.
Right. And I don't think any fan would really fault you for it, but I think we've all kind of been in that conundrum every once in a while. But of course, you're here to talk real football with us, not necessarily fantasy football.
Right.
And we're going to talk about the Buccaneers' first trimester, which is kind of a new thing because usually we're talking about the first quarters of the season. And I actually almost fired off this invite to do this last week, and James reminded me. He's like, "Hey, by the way, there's 18 weeks now. You want to wait another week?" I was like, "Oh, yeah." I appreciate the reminder there. So, Bucs first 6 weeks are in the books. The next 6 weeks coming up. They only have 5 games in the next 6 weeks, of course, because of the bye week. And hopefully you can come back and join me back on for that as well. I wanted to start with Tom Brady because quarterback's most important position on the field. Tom Brady is the best quarterback to ever play the game. But really, the effect of last year to this year. So last year, obviously, Tom is still fairly new to the organization, and some of the restrictions, maybe he's not moving as freely around and getting to know people just as well. But now it's been a year, Super Bowl championship through everything, and an offseason working together. Is there a difference now? Are people like maybe more comfortable, and is that impact still kind of as palpable as it was last year?
You mean like the atmosphere around the building and just interactions with people, that kind of thing?
Yeah, because like last year, it was like, oh, Tom Brady's in the building, and we don't want to disappoint Tom, and I'm sure some of that is still there. But are people just more? I feel like they have to be more comfortable. But is there still a discernible difference in the team?
I would say maybe the biggest difference is there's not 6 questions every week about, oh my God, what's it like to play with Tom Brady? That at least has calmed down a little bit. And I think after a while, the players are like, okay, yeah, he's the greatest of all time, but he's also been our teammate for like 10 weeks now, and we're friends, and it's like playing football. So yeah. And Tom himself just seems so comfortable, and just about everything he's doing, the stuff he does for our website, the stuff he does himself on social media, he just seems like he's having a great time. And I'm sure that's contagious. And it helps that he's playing at such a high level still as well. I'd say it's very comfortable around here. And, maybe the whole awe factor starts to wear off a little bit. And, until you step back and look at the numbers and what he's doing at the age of 44, which is deserving of yet another level of awe of everything he's done in his career. But no, I would say overall it's pretty comfortable, and hopefully it's going to last a few more years.
Yeah, that would be amazing, of course. And then we get a few more books out of it. We got Lars Anderson. I'm still not getting the camera thing down. So we got Lars Anderson, who just came out with his newest book about the 2020 Super Bowl champion Buccaneers. We're able to have him on the show, read the book. It's great. Obviously, everybody should be into that. But of course, Tom Brady is a focal point of that as well. And then kind of keeping with the year to date kind of theme, 4-2 at this point last season, or through 6 games rather last season, 5-1 this season. So the record not too much different, but I think you would agree that the team is different and the way it's being done is different, not only because of the efficiency in some areas, but also because of the amount of injuries they've been facing. How do you feel, or if you can tap back into kind of how you were feeling after 6 games in 2020, how would you compare the two between the last season and this season?
Yeah, 4-2 felt good last year, but it didn't. You didn't really know what it meant yet. There was obviously a lot of ups and downs. There was a lot of the offense trying to gel, but and being pretty good. Had a couple big games like the Chargers game, but still, it was still coming together, And even the defense probably wasn't really hitting its stride yet at that point. So it wasn't. I would say this year you go in every week feeling at this point after having been through this in 26 games, and we've won 20 of them since he arrived, I think that's right.
I think so.
It's just, it feels a lot more expected at this point. And I don't mean that, and I'm not, it's not like I'm winning games. So I don't mean that like they go out there and just expect to win, but as somebody on the edges of it, it's not a feeling that you've had as a Buccaneer employee or fan very often through the years. And you do kind of go into every week thinking you got a really good shot to win, not only because the roster at this point, everybody knows is loaded, but just because Tom Brady tends to come through, New England and Dallas. And after a while, you kind of start to lose that hard-earned skepticism or pessimism towards the end of games, thinking, well, what's going to go wrong, or we're not going to be able to make the big play at the end, because now we kind of do most of the time. And you got Tom Brady, who's the best at that. Now, you're right about the injuries. That's the thing that that wasn't a challenge for us last year. And I've said a lot this offseason that the Buccaneers were very, very fortunate in a lot of ways last year. Like tough road games on the playoffs with hardly any crowds. You normally have worse crowds, things like that. And one of the things they were very fortunate about, for the most part, was injuries. And I think that's true of a lot of playoff teams and Super Bowl champions. You get fortunate and don't lose a lot of key players to injuries. This year, it's been a bit more of a struggle. And so it's kind of a different kind of journey, especially on defense. And I think all the credit goes to Todd Bowles for just new guys coming in all the time, new guys with different skill sets than other ones, some that don't know the defense as well. And he's doing a good job of mixing and matching guys and scheming up for what we need on each particular game and getting by. You can say great job by Dee Delaney and Richard Sherman before he got hurt and Kevin Minter and so on. But I think a lot of the credit should probably also go to Todd Bowles for figuring out how to use these guys the best.
Absolutely. Yeah. And we've been trying to make it a point to do just that and shine that spotlight on Todd Bowles. Unfortunately, James also gets mad at me because sometimes, that conversation shining that light on him also goes to the fact that other teams are going to notice as well.
Not much we can do about that.
Need a head coach. Yeah. So
it's
hopefully
kind of
he sticks around. I think everybody wants him to stick around and someday succeed Bruce Arians, but we'll see how that whole thing unfolds.
Todd's a great guy. So what you want for him is what he wants. And if he wants another head coaching job next year, I hope he gets it. Won't be good for the Buccaneers. So, obviously we'd love to have him around forever, but hopefully he gets another shot.
More still to come on this bonus episode of the Locked On Bucs podcast, and we're doing it thanks to our friends over at rockauto.com, who remind you that with the ever-increasing numbers of makes and models, it's literally impossible for your local chain auto parts store or your dealership to carry all the parts you're ever going to need. If you have a computer or access to a computer, you have access to rockauto.com. Why would you choose to spend 30, 50, even 100% more for the same parts at a chain store or a dealership than you can get it for at rockauto.com, a family business serving do-it-yourselfers for over 20 years. They have everything you could need, whether it's brake parts, tail lamps, motor oil, or new carpet. Go to rockauto.com right now. See all the parts available for your car or truck right locked on in their How Did You Hear About Us box so they know that we sent you. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. rockauto.com. So far right now through the season, that defense 16th in points allowed, which I think a lot of people would probably, if I told you that in preseason that they're going to be 16th in points allowed at this point, would probably be a little bit upset. And to be honest, there are some Bucs fans who still are a little bit upset about how much the Buccaneers are giving up in passing yards, even though, their yards per attempt and all those things aren't as high as maybe people would think. And again, the points allowed and all that. Third in the league in scoring. So obviously they have the firepower to keep up while they try to get that defense healthy. But how do you feel about this offense specifically? We just kind of talked about the defense. I mean, again, we talk about the amazing things that Tom Brady has done, and some of that has gone away, but some of that is still there. And is it possible that we're seeing Brady get even better? And if so, it's probably not physically better, right? He's probably peaked physically just because of the way biology works, but I think it probably goes more towards being more comfortable with his weapons. And do you think this is a pace that this offense can maintain through the rest of the season?
David, I've been around long enough in the NFL to the point that I look at us averaging 426 yards per game on offense and realize we're ranked third in the league.
Yeah.
That those numbers still stun me that
Right.
teams are averaging that. And I think that's where we are in the NFL right now. I know things are cyclical, but I doubt we're ever going to go back too far in the other direction in terms of defense. I think that's what the NFL is now.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of teams, I don't think there's a lot of teams in the NFL right now that are winning because of their defense, like the old Buccaneers teams.
Right.
I think the main formula, the formula that works the best, and partially because offense tends to be less volatile from year to year if you keep the same players than defense does. Defense tends to be a lot more volatile in terms of results from year to year. The Bucs, that's what makes the Bucs stretch from their last Super Bowl era so amazing, that the defense was good year after year after year. You don't see a lot of that. So I think the formula for a lot of teams in the NFL right now is let's get the best possible offense we can and hope this defense comes around. And at the beginning of the year, the Bucs defense was really giving up a lot of yards and a lot of points, but I do think it's coming around a little bit. And, when we start to get a few replacements back, guys that are injured, I think there's a chance for this team defensively to sort of hit its stride again like it did last year. And if we're still scoring 32 points a game, even now at a middle of the pack defense, that's probably enough to win most games. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, absolutely.
As for Tom Brady, I don't know if he's better than he was a couple of years ago. I mean, statistically he is, but obviously one of the reasons he came here was to have this amazing cast around him, and it's working. So the results are better. And I think part of that is he is doing a really good job, and so are the play callers, of taking what the defenses are giving us. So over the last 3 weeks in particular, these teams have been daring us to run, playing soft zones, trying to take away the big plays, and Tom's just, cutting them to death with a million, shallow cuts. And, right now the Buccaneers lead the league in yards after the catch. That's someplace we've never been before. That's not the type of offense we've seen before, but that's what they're giving us. And Tom knows how to make that work. So he's playing as good as he ever has, I would say. You're probably right. A 44-year-old can't be in the same peak physical condition, even with his amazing regimen, that he was 10, 15 years ago. But his level of play seems to be just as high as ever.
Yeah, the results on the field speak for themselves. And so far, again, Buccaneers 5-1 with wins against Dallas Cowboys, Atlanta Falcons, New England Patriots, Miami Dolphins, Eagles, and then hopefully coming up against Chicago Bears. Out of all those wins, Scott, which one do you think is, if you had to earmark one as the best win of the season so far, which one would you pick out of that group?
I'm sure emotionally it was the New England win. And in terms of where I thought we were clearly better than the other team, it was Atlanta, even though it was kind of close until they pulled away at the end. But the Dallas win for me is the big one, because I thought at the time, going into that game with Dak back, and then after the game, and the results have proven true, that this is a legitimately good team. You tend to think after the NFC East was so terrible last year that you don't want to overrate any of those teams this year. But I think that's a legitimately very good team that's going to be contending right down to the end. They're better on defense this year than they were disastrous last year. Dak's back. To me, that's a real quality win that's going to help us down the road. And it kind of shows. I also didn't think the Buccaneers played a really perfect game then, but they were able to overcome their own mistakes and still beat what has proven to be a very quality team. So to me, that's probably the one that says the most about us at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, I think sometimes those near losses mean a little bit more than the blowout wins and all those things. You learn a lot about each other. And I know, I think it was Jamel Dean today talked about, or on Wednesday rather, talked about the resilience of the squad and what it means to be able to persevere through all these injuries. He himself experiencing one of them. And then I can't really ask you for a worst loss because there's only the one to the Los Angeles Rams. How much stock do you put into that loss? Is there anything that even still after these weeks following that game that kind of bothers you about that might come up, later in the season or maybe in the playoffs if you see the Rams again? or do you think that was kind of a one-off where I've kind of put it, I think the Rams maybe just wanted it a little bit more than the Buccaneers realized like that they were going to come in wanting it?
Well, it's a legitimate loss. I thought, and I if you were to go back and look at some of the videos, I've been saying since the spring that I thought the Rams were going to be the toughest game on our schedule. And so, and they're 5-1 and clearly a legitimate NFC title contender. So to lose to them on the road, you don't want to do that, but it's not disastrous. I mean, if you were going to lose one game of these first 6, if you're going to ask me which one it was going to be, I would have guessed it was that Rams game. And really, the takeaway for me from that game was the Buccaneers were having some problems offensively on third downs, and they started out very slow, and so they didn't, they had to play catch up. And if they had just had a little more success on their early drives, it wouldn't have been such a big deficit that they were trying to overcome at the end. And they might have been able to come back and win because they eventually got into gear. I think in most games, this offense is eventually going to find its way. But there was just too big of a hole dug by third down problems. Now you look up and the Buccaneers, I think, are third in the league in third down percentage. And it's probably even better than that because we've actually had a ton of third down kneel downs from these victories. So those hurt your third down percentage. And yet we're still at about 49%. Right. Probably should be more like 53% true third down percentage. And you can't really argue with that. That's fantastic. Even though third down rates across the NFL have gone up dramatically in recent years, that's still really, really good. And so if I felt like that was our issue in the Rams game, and we've done very well in that regard since, then I guess you could say that's pretty optimistic.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, similar type set, not quite as effective, to be honest with you, because it is part of their offense. But I remember during the offseason talking to some Bucs fans about the poor average for the running game last year. And I took kind of like the Ravens and the Chiefs, and I took away their quarterback runs because we don't have a Patrick Mahomes or a Lamar Jackson running in Tampa, Florida. And I took those out. And once you do that, they evened out a little bit more. But still, of course, you're not going to take away Patrick Mahomes and Lamar Jackson. So they are what they are. We kind of touched on these injuries already earlier, Scott, but the Buccaneers have lost a starter every single week this season. And granted, Richard Sherman was a starter because of losing some of the other starters, but the fact still stands. The Buccaneers have lost a starter every single week to injury, mostly on defense. And have you, you've been with the Buccaneers for a while, you've been covering the sport for even longer. Have you ever seen a team go through this kind of early injury bug? And then, you kind of already mentioned it, but there are, like I said, there are still fans out there who are kind of like, yeah, even with the injuries, they should be doing better. Can you kind of give like the inside the game view of why it's actually pretty impressive that the team has been able to do what they have in light of all the injuries?
Well, first of all, yes, I have seen this before.
Really?
Yes, 100%. And the thing that makes these kind of situations stand out is when you have injuries concentrated at one position group, because everybody around the NFL is getting hit by injuries. And, like Cleveland, the Giants, there's a lot of teams that have had terrible injury problems. San Francisco last year was ridiculous, but the Buccaneers' problems are concentrated in the secondary. And I can remember a few years back at this point, it's probably 5 or 6 years ago, when we were going to play Carolina and we had so many guys on the defensive line injured. And there was a stretch during the season when Gerald McCoy and all those guys were out at the same time. And, that really makes it tough. That's a hard thing to overcome. And I have seen it before. And this isn't, to me, like, it doesn't feel like a disaster. You know what I'm saying? Like, if you break it down, you go 3 of your 4 starting defensive backs, not counting Jamel Dean as a nickel back, from week 1 are all out. That's pretty scary. And you're using guys that you signed in September, all of them, like Pierre Desir and Rashard Robinson, and Dee Delaney was around a little bit longer, but Richard Sherman. The results, considering all that, haven't been that bad. And also, one thing I would say is to not focus too much on yards. I can't tell you how many times coaches have made it clear to us that they don't care about yardage rankings at all. Yards is not what it's all about. And obviously, if you're a historically bad defense giving up tons of yards, you're probably giving up tons of points too. But it's not the yards that really matter. So I think we're still last in passing yards probably, but it's come down quite a bit recently. And it's more about how effective are they overall and how many points are they scoring? And it's not perfect, obviously, and the Bucs have given up a decent amount of points, but it's been better recently despite all the injuries. So, I would say don't worry about it too much at this point. They're still playing well enough for us to win, and reinforcements are coming at some point.
One more segment here at the Locked On Bucs podcast, a bonus episode. David Harrison, your host, with Scott Smith of Buccaneers.com. Free and available on all platforms. Thank you again for making us your first watch or listen of the day. We're here doing this for you thanks to our friends over at betonline.ag. With the new basketball season up and running, there are more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline remains your number one spot for all the basketball and football action this season. Head to our new updated desktop or mobile website. Sign up today and get a 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit when you use a promo code Locked On. Whether you're looking for basketball, football, baseball, postseason action, NHL, boxing, UFC, or your favorite Vegas casino games, don't wait. Take advantage of all the amazing offers available for the 2020 season. BetOnline is still the fastest and easiest way to bet on all your favorite sports. BetOnline, where the game starts. Absolutely. And that's kind of what James has been saying is like, look, if you're going to get hit by this bug, you want to get hit by it early on, not later on. So hopefully the team can get through it, get healthy for the end of the season, and then be healthy for that postseason run. Scott, obviously the next trimester coming up, I still got used to saying that. The Buccaneers have 5 games because they have that week 9 bye week in that next 6 weeks. We've got the Bears coming up, the first game against New Orleans Saints, and then after the bye, travel to the nation's capital, face the Washington football team, and then a home visit from the New York Giants, followed by the Colts. If there's if you put it on like a spice meter here, which of those games is the most worrisome you think for the Buccaneers moving forward?
The Saints, obviously, and that's a game that the Buccaneers really need to win, because even last year went all the way. Of course, everybody would trade any other thing for winning the Super Bowl, but this team wants to win this division. And
right,
I know the Saints are a different team now. Drew Brees gone and Jameis Winston. Are they good? Are they not good? The defense is still very good. It's hard to tell yet if the Saints are close to as good as they were last year. But until we know for sure that they're not, I don't think we can count them out. And they've won the division 4 games in a row. 4 years in a row. They've had a couple games in that stretch where they were clearly the better team than us, and not just last year's 38-3 shellacking here, but a few others. And yeah, we overcame that to win in the playoffs last year, which was the most important game. But until we overcome the Saints, they've still got it on us. You know what I'm saying? And they've won the division. They swept us last year in the regular season. We just have had a hard time overcoming them because they tend to play very well in the games against us, and we tend to make mistakes. Yep. And they're a very complete team, or they were at least with Drew Brees. We don't know yet if this offense can be as good as it was. It's had some ups and downs this year, but to me, that's the game that the Buccaneers need to win to get to where they really want to go and win the division and be in the running for that one first round bye if possible.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, division champs until they're not anymore, and beating them, especially in their house, would be a big step towards achieving that. Who knows? Michael Thomas may be coming back around that time. I don't know 100% what his status is, but that's going to give them a shot in the arm. Of course, a little bit more motivation there. Looking back at the trimester for the season, though, Scott, there's some surprises, just like there are every single year. I think I'm not going to call it the positive surprise, but the upside surprise, right? We'll call it that. Are the Cardinals, obviously 6-0. I don't think anybody predicted that. Kyler Murray, a leading MVP candidate for all the obvious reasons. Do you buy it? I'm going to steal from another show. Do you buy it or sell it, Kyler Murray, as an MVP candidate by the time the season wraps up?
Yeah, I buy it. I think they've shown enough. They've gotten some really quality wins in the last couple of weeks against the Rams and the Browns. I think the Cardinals are for real. Yeah. And honestly, to be honest with you, I think all of the teams in the NFC that are 5-1 or better are for real. That's Dallas and Green Bay and the Rams and the Bucs and the Cardinals. And that's going to be a dogfight right to the end. I don't expect any of those teams to really tail off too much. Mm-hmm. And it's funny because the West does have Arizona and the Rams, right, but all those other teams are spread out between the other divisions. So there's a possibility that Packers will beat up on the rest of their division. You know, the Cowboys will beat up on the rest of their division. We'll see how it goes for us in the NFC South. But I kind of think you're going to end up with a very top-heavy NFC at the end and a really interesting and tough battle down the stretch.
Yeah, absolutely. I heard you saying the same thing on the Salty Dogs podcast. I was nodding the entire time you said it there, just like I was here. Yeah, it's very interesting. I mean, if anything, you're setting up for a lot of potential instant classic playoff matchups come January and February. On the other end of the spectrum, I guess if you have to say there's a surprise down team, it would be the Kansas City Chiefs, 3-3. I suppose if 500 is a down year, through the first 6 games, a lot of teams would be appreciative of that being the down of their season. But what do you attribute that early season slump to? Because watching them play Washington football team last weekend, they definitely look like a team that deserves to be 500 right now. They've got other losses to the Ravens, Chargers, and Bills. So some say it's just a level of competition being risen up, and once they get past kind of that hard part of their schedule, you'll see that record kind of reflect their talent more. Do you agree with that line of thinking, or do you think maybe the Chiefs are getting caught up to it, maybe getting surpassed a little bit in the AFC?
Well, the Ravens, Chargers, and Bills, that's a gauntlet. But if you're a team that's been in the last 2 Super Bowls and was widely considered one of the best, if not the best, one of the 2 best teams coming into this season, and you've got Patrick Mahomes, and he seems to find a way to win every game, you don't expect to lose all 3 of those games to your prime AFC contenders. But the thing about the AFC is I think Baltimore's the only 5-1 team, and nobody's 6-0, and the Bills are 4-2. So the Chiefs haven't really fallen too much off of the pace so far. So there's still plenty of time for them to reestablish their place at the top of that conference. But that defense, they've got to get that figured out in some way or another, because I guess what it's showing is that even with Patrick Mahomes, he's not going to be able to bail you out every single game if your defense is performing really, really poorly. No. And I don't know how they're going to fix it, to be honest with you. I think they've got some real personnel issues. I don't think it's a matter of injuries, right? I don't remember them having a ton of injuries.
Not enough to warrant what's happening. Absolutely.
Yeah, I still think Patrick Mahomes is going to pull them up a little bit, and they'll still end up being in the fight for the number 1 seed there in the AFC. But they're kind of, what they've basically done is kind of erase their margin for error, and they're going to need to really turn it up quite a bit, because I think the Bills are fantastic. The Ravens look amazing at this point, and there's a couple other contenders out there too. So they're in a tough spot, but I wouldn't bet against Patrick Mahomes.
No, absolutely. It's a weird circumstance to be in. Last year, around the Super Bowl time, everybody's talking about Patrick Mahomes and the Kansas City Chiefs being the next great NFL dynasty. And now here we are just months later, wondering if the Kansas City Chiefs have just completely fallen off. Of course, Scott, this weekend, the Buccaneers' next matchup, the Chicago Bears, we mentioned a couple times already. It's a little early. We're talking on Wednesday, just so everybody out there understands. But do you have a bold prediction, or maybe some fantasy football advice for those out there looking for a guy to start from the Buccaneers roster this weekend?
All right. Well, I can start with that part. My first thought again would have been to go to Antonio Brown, but I have to wait and see if he's available, because he wasn't able to practice today with an ankle injury. I think that the type of defense that the teams are playing against us now, and I expect the Bears to do something similar, it lends itself to our best players who can get a lot of short passes and turn them into bigger gains. And I think AB is the number 1 guy in that regard. I also wouldn't rule out Leonard Fournette, because he's running with a lot of confidence. Teams are daring us to run, and we're doing it. And the Bears' rush defense is not as good as all their defensive numbers are for the most part. Their rush defense really isn't top of the charts. I think they're giving up 129 yards per game. They may be without Robert Quinn. Akeem Hicks is dealing with a groin injury that he aggravated in the last game, so don't know if he's available or how close to 100% he'll be. Right. So I think there'll be a possibility for Leonard Fournette to have another good game. And if I wouldn't have touched any back in the Buccaneers backfield in fantasy when we were drafting or for the first month of the season. But at this point, it's pretty clear that you don't have to worry about Ronald Jones poaching from Leonard Fournette's fantasy stats. So at this point, if I could get Leonard Fournette, I would want him.
Yeah, absolutely.
I started at the end now. Was the rest of it just like about the Bears in general?
Yeah, just like any thoughts about the Bears, any bold predictions you want to throw out there so that everybody can keep the receipts and throw them back at you if they don't come true?
I get nervous about every game, and we've had some struggles against the Bears recently, and I don't expect this to be an easy win for the Buccaneers at all, but you do kind of sometimes sit back and go, well, the Bucs are averaging 32 points a game. The Bears are averaging about 16 points a game, and Justin Fields could find it all of a sudden, and the offense could explode, but it's hard to imagine the Bears being able to keep pace with the Bucs if they go over 30 again with the offense that they've displayed so far. Right. So I think as long as the Buccaneers can handle the Bears defense, and they've been able to handle other good defenses for the most part, it's pretty hard to make a prediction that the Bears will be able to hang with them. You know what I'm saying? I'm hopeful that the Bears' struggles on the offensive line will make it a good defensive game for the Buccaneers, because that offensive line has not performed very well so far. They've given up, I think, the most sacks in the league, certainly the highest pressure rate, I believe. And that makes it tough for a rookie, even a mobile and athletic guy like Justin Fields, to, get his feet under him and really start to figure out how to operate that offense if he's constantly under pressure.
Absolutely. And in some places I've seen the betting lines as high as the Buccaneers being 13-point favorites, which always makes you a little bit nervous, because those are the games that come back to bite people in the butt sometimes.
Yeah. And don't forget, these guys have had our number. They have really had our number. And I wouldn't get too confident about any game against the Bears right now.
Absolutely. And great stuff from you as always, Scott. Appreciate you taking the time to speak with us today. Scott Smith, senior writer and editor over at Buccaneers.com, on Twitter at ScottAskBucks. If you're not reading, following, and then of course listening over at the Salty Dogs podcast already, you definitely should be. Scott, thank you again. Yeah, Trimester in review. Appreciate you joining me, and looking forward to talking to you again.
Thank you, David. It's always a pleasure. I appreciate it.
All right, that's going to do it for this special bonus edition of the Locked On Bucs podcast. Again, I'm David Harrison, on Twitter at DHarrison82. My co-host James Yarko is at JYarko_Bucks. Scott Smith at Scott S. Bucks, the senior writer and editor of your Buccaneers.com. Thanks again for making the Locked On Bucs podcast your first listen or watch every single day. Now make your second listen or third, depending on if you caught our regular episode that already dropped earlier today, your second or third listen, the Peacock and Williamson NFL show. Brian Peacock and former NFL scout Matt Williamson give you the expert NFL analysis in less than 30 minutes. It's free and it's available on all platforms. James and I will be back tomorrow for our final preview of your Tampa Bay Buccaneers hosting Justin Fields and the Chicago Bears for Week 6. Again, it's Sunday afternoon, kickoff time, 4:25 p.m. Eastern. Until we speak again, guys, if you're out and about, please be safe, be kind to one another, wash your hands, and thank you for joining me right here at Locked On Bucs.